could just be building a big storage tent. And if it means that we spent $6 million on building a big storage tent, but we did not have a failure of a project that would negatively impact that community, so be it.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Politicians are allowed to change their minds, but rarely does the public get to watch a politician reverse course in real time while being televised. Kameron Perez-Verdia, Assembly Member for West Anchorage, provided just that experience at the Assembly meeting on May 10th, 2022, when shortly after he had persuasively explained why he couldn't vote to fund Mayor Bronson's planned emergency shelter at Elmore and Tudor, Perez-Verdia voted in support of that funding. His vote was the deciding factor. We discuss his sudden change of heart and much more today on the podcast. Kameron Perez-Verdia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, for our listeners who may not be following local politics as closely as some of us,
right.
When Mayor Bronson was elected, he made solving Anchorage homelessness his priority, and it kind of was anchored by this proposed navigation center and shelter at Elmore and Tudor.
Right.
And after months and months and months of negotiations and facilitated process between the Assembly and the mayoral administration, it seemed that things were moving forward. And at the last Assembly meeting, which was less than 2 weeks ago, you guys had to make that big decision to commit $6.2 million towards the initiating of that plan. So you spoke that night, shortly before the vote. I'm going to play what you said before that vote, and that is where we're going to start.
However, I can't vote yes for this. There's too many questions outstanding for me. The financial questions are still unanswered for me. The operations questions are still unanswered for me. And the location seems really problematic to me. And I spent the week talking to as many people as I possibly could who have been involved in this and done this work. And there's just too many unanswered questions for me to vote yes. It does not feel like a responsible choice at this point.
Can you talk us through a little bit of how you went from giving that speech to voting yes a short time later?
Sure. Well, and there's so much I want to say that sort of sets the context of this. You know, you set the context in terms of the mayor coming in and the proposal and the work that has been done. And I, of course, have not been in the facilitation process, but have been following all of that very closely and have seen this entire thing evolve. And I still believe everything that I said in that statement and the statement prior to that, where I asked lots of questions about the location and about the financing and about the operations. And we still don't have answers to those questions. The process for me was that when we came to the vote, it was clear to me that it was going to fail. And I had to recalculate at that point because my understanding was that it was going to pass. And some folks who had indicated that they were going to vote for it had changed their vote. And I had seen that. And so I knew that it was my vote, that it was going to either approve it or deny it. And I calculated three things. First, that is it impossible for this project to be successful? And I think the answer to that is no. We don't know enough about it. We don't know enough about the operations and the financing, the transportation, and all of those things that I mentioned. Is there time to find out that information? Is there time to shift any of that? I believe there is. And I believe that now that I'm directly involved in the facilitated process, and I can tell you even since that vote, there has been a lot of work to try to shift this project to something that's done in a more responsible way. So that was the first thing. Is it impossible? No. I think it's still possible that this project could be viable and could be something that was valuable. But it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot more information for us to do that. The second piece for me was if I vote no on this, will it shut down the entire facilitated process? And I believe the answer to that was yes. That the partners that we have at the table, the funders that we have at our table, the many community partners who have been working on this for months, would it all end? Would the administration shut it down? And I believe that they would have. And so is it worth keeping this project on the table, knowing that there's possibility that we could improve it and change it, and keep the many other projects that we're working on the table as well? Transitional housing, treatment centers, supportive permanent housing, all of these projects that are vital to our community. So that was the second piece that I really had to think through. And third, I thought to myself, in this environment that we find ourselves in, with an assembly and administration that it's so difficult to work together, the only place where I see progress right now is in that process. And so I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to continue that work. So that's what went through my head. And I'm still not sure it was the right vote. I think that I questioned it afterwards, and I still do. But as I see what we've done over the last just week and a half, 2 weeks since that, I don't know if it's been that long, but there is progress being made in areas that I think are really, really important. So that was my thinking around it, I think, again, there are many more places from here forward where this project could move forward or could stop. We could just be building a big storage tent. And if it means that we spent $6 million on building a big storage tent, but we did not have a failure of a project that would negatively impact that community, so be it. I will not be a part of putting a facility in that neighborhood that has fire danger, that has folks camping in the woods, that has the kind of impact that we saw in downtown. And I think there's still many opportunities for us to shape that.
So one thing that many residents were happy about was the resolution to make the funding contingent on using the Golden Lion for its intended purpose as a substance misuse treatment facility. Yep. And I think everyone agrees that we need some sort of substance misuse treatment in Anchorage, not just for unhoused people, but for people. Yep. And many of us were relieved when you did that, so thank you. Yeah. But I want to play from the Thursday night. It was a conditional permit use meeting that the mayor's office held, very poorly attended.
Yeah, and Andrew, before we go there, can I just go back for a second? Mm-hmm. It was part of that context that you had set, and I want to make sure that listeners also understand that when the mayor came in, it was not a navigation center. It was a massive homeless shelter that was so large and so dangerous in many ways that it was so different from what we in the community and those who have been working on homelessness for decades. We knew this was not the right direction, and so that got transformed into a 150-bed shelter that would potentially end in 2 years, and a navigation center that had partners in vocational rehabilitation, in transitional housing, in treatment centers, and bringing in partners across the community, and also brought in now $10 to $12 million in private and philanthropic funding that had never been on the table before. And so we are at a whole different place than we have ever been. There is more people at the table than ever before. And this project that, again, I think is still very questionable, is in a whole different place than it was. And I think that all that speaks to is that there's more work to be done. And if it is going to be there, and if it is going to be a viable project, there's more work that needs to be done to make sure that it's done right.
Right. I think all of our understandings have evolved a lot in the last 6 weeks, probably. Mm-hmm. I think there was a huge epiphany for many of us, and I can't remember the exact meeting, but it was when we all of a sudden realized that the navigation center and the emergency shelter are two separate things that do not have to be united together.
That's correct.
So when we go back a year ago and Mayor-elect Bronson was talking about a navigation center with capacity up to 1,000, a navigation center doesn't necessarily require any shelter beds at all. That's simply a place where resources are available to those who need them.
And there are many navigation centers across the country that do not have any shelter physically attached to them. That's very common.
Right. And so I think the second epiphany was, if we were going to have just a great navigation center, having it next to Far North Bicentennial Park is probably not the best location.
Yep, I would agree with that.
And so I think for those of us who live at Elmore and Tudor, which, full disclosure, I do. It's why I'm involved in local politics, period. This is what got me involved.
Right.
It's the shelter component that we're mainly talking about at all times. No one would argue that we don't want a navigation center.
Yep.
And I would say that I am at fault for using the mayor's language a lot, where I will say navigation center when I'm actually talking about emergency shelter.
Yep.
So, yes, and I will thank the Assembly for reducing that size, for making it more manageable, for making it something that if it were to happen, we feel more comfortable with. But to get back to the question that I was asking, the substance misuse treatment facility, that is a pillar. Mm-hmm. And when Dave Bronson was running, a central tenet of his campaign was that the Golden Lion would not be used in this way.
Right. He said,
it's a campaign promise.
He said the day after he is elected, it will be sold.
Correct. So, I mean, I know you can't speak for him, but what's wrong with the Golden Lion, and why can't we use it for that? I mean,
well, there's nothing wrong with the Golden Lion. It's actually a very good facility for providing treatment. One of the things that we know is that of all the different types of substance misuse behavioral health treatment that we have and we need in our city and in our state, one of the particular areas that is most in need is what's called 3.3, and that's a higher level of co-occurring treatment that requires almost a treatment center, but a medical sort of facility as well. And so that was the intended use of this, was that it was going to be primarily a 3.3, probably with other treatment services as well. But we know those type of treatment centers have virtually no negative impact on their surrounding neighborhoods because people are not wandering in and out. People are there, they're receiving treatment, and what we know about those centers across the country is that they actually, in many ways, benefit the neighborhood because they're well groomed, they're high security, they tend to be good neighbors. And so the language around the impact that this would have with the surrounding community is just what wasn't true. So there's nothing wrong with that facility. It was disheartening to hear that was his campaign promise, that he was going to get rid of a building that we had already purchased and was ready to go and to provide treatment. And so it's been in limbo for all of this time and been used for whatever. And so recently, as part of the negotiation for the Navigation Center, we added a resolution asking the mayor to give a good faith effort to actually look at using this for a treatment center. That was passed. And it was our understanding that there was every indication that that's exactly what he was intending to do. And in the work that I'm doing with others in this facilitated process, we are working on that very conversation now, right? Bringing in experts in behavioral health, looking at what the need is, looking at what role the Golden Lion would play. So it's not necessarily about whether we should use that facility or not. It's what is the need? What is the actual need in our community, and what could potentially this facility provide as part of that need? So that's where we were a few days ago. And then the mayor came out and said what he said.
Right. So I will say that for those of us who follow this process very, very closely, we expected some outrage and outcry from his supporters when the assembly passed that resolution to use it for its intended purpose, but we didn't really hear that. And so I think there is, I guess for lack of a better word, maybe some sort of conspiracy theory that they knew that Mayor Bronson was not going to do that. And so we are recording this interview on May 21st. So I'm going to play Mayor Bronson speaking on May 19th. Right. So 48 hours ago.
Yeah, I need to make it real clear. The Golden Lion is being sold. We have 2 bidders for it right now, so we're not using the Golden Lion for treatment for homeless facilities. So I just wanted to clarify that.
So the mayor wants to clarify that. He wants to be real clear.
Yeah.
It will not be used for treatment.
Right.
So, I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, just prior to that, the director of the health department said an RFP was put out.
Yes.
And the director of the health department is part of the facilitated process. And I think it came as a surprise to all of us that he said that. So where do we go from here? And my hope is that the mayor will retract that statement, knowing that his team has been working very hard on finding a way to potentially use the Golden Lion as treatment. And it may not turn out that way, but at least a good faith effort will be put forward to look at whether that's possible and it's needed and whether that's the right facility. And that's what we want. We want it to be a very, very real effort. I believe that it is. I believe that it is an ideal setting for that kind of treatment. But I'm not a behavioral health specialist, and so we need to go through the process of determining that. So my hope is that he will retract that statement, because it is in direct conflict with what many of his senior staff have been saying for the last few weeks. And that's what I hope. If he proceeds forward and does not give a good faith effort, then it begins to break down the process we're in. It begins to break down our movement forward on providing funding for the Navigation Center, on moving forward on a number of projects. And it's this kind of statement that is dangerous in an effort to actually work it together. So that's where I'm at. I'm hoping that it was a misstatement or a mistake, and that he will come back and say, you know what, I apologize for this. This is not where my team is at. They've been working very hard, and we're trying to figure out the best path forward for the Golden Lion. If he proceeds forward with saying no, as a matter of fact, we're going to sell it, there's no option there, I think that the assembly and the facilitated process has to recalculate and to think about changing course.
So I'm going to say a couple of things. You may not want to comment. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. There are certain things that Mayor Bronson is committed to at any cost. And to me, there are 2 that we're talking about right now. Number 1 is that any emergency shelter that is constructed must be located at Elmore and Tudor. And number 2, that the Golden Lion will not be used as a substance misuse treatment facility. And so I think that it takes logic out of it. There's not really a consideration for what an expert says or what the community says. Yeah. It's for some reason, those are the non-negotiables. And to compromise, to change course on those two things would be a loss. And I think there is an element of winning and losing here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that he is willing to admit defeat, because that's what it would feel like to him. So I would just offer the prediction that there is no, if he retracts, it doesn't matter.
Right.
You're not going to get the Golden Lion. They're not going to consider another location. They love to talk about how 5 locations were looked at. Elmore and Tudor was the only answer.
So that may be true. And I think there's, if you're following this as closely as you have followed it, and a few others have followed it, I could absolutely see how you would come to that conclusion. I can't, as an elected official and as someone who's lived here and raising my kids here and wanting the best for this city, I have to continue to provide some level of hope that he would change course, if given the opportunity, if given the need. And if not, then it makes it impossible for us to figure out a way to find some coordinated path forward. And so that's where I'm going to stay at this point. I'm going to stay at the place that I would agree that it's every indication at this point is that he wants the Golden Lion sold. I'm curious why at this point the resolution passed unanimously, why many of his supporters on the assembly voted for it, why strong supporters of him have come out and questioned why this facility is not being used. And so I think it's possible. I think it's possible that he will change course and that this may be used for treatment. I also think that, and I was saying this to someone just recently, that the Navigation Center and the low barrier shelter are absolutely vital. We need those. I don't know if we need them in that location, and that's partly what I said. And buying a tent and getting things ready does not necessarily mean that it has to be in that location. Now, I'm not promising anything at all, but what I'm saying is that me and others on the assembly that are directly involved in this negotiation process will continue to push those questions. And if there's not good answers for them, how are we going to manage this the right way? Then there will be a point at which the resources necessary to move this forward won't be there. Because that's part of our role, is to make sure that we're allocating resources in a responsible way. And so, as I said, more questions need to be answered. I still stand with the hope that the mayor can change his mind, and that these promises that he has made can change.
And I will say, I hope you're right. Let's change gears.
Okay.
Why did you run for the assembly in the first place?
It's a good question. When I ran for the school board, so I was appointed to the school board, so it was sort of like an interview process.
And what year was that?
Oh boy, 2013-ish, maybe. And so there was an open seat, and I put in my name for it and went through an interview process and eventually got that seat, and I was there for a year. And then decided to run. Never having run for anything in my life. Very interesting experience, campaigns and fundraising and all of that thing surrounding elections. And I did that primarily because I have kids in school, because I come from an education background. My mother and father were both ed educators in Alaska for decades. So I knew enough about what was going on in schools, and I wanted to be involved. So that's why I did that. And I loved that experience. I really loved being on the school board. But after 4 years, I was taking a new job, and I felt like I'd done that, and I was going to move on, and I wasn't going to run for anything again. And so I took my new job, and that was going very well. and I began.
Is that the job you have now?
Yes, same job I'm in now. And so, several people contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in serving on the assembly. I said no. Those conversations continued, learning a little bit more about sort of what that meant and what was involved, and some of the projects and initiatives that were going on in the city, which were really important to me. Public service and building community is really what I want to do in my life, and that's the organization that I run. It's what it's all about, strengthening communities. So, and then an opportunity opened up. There was a seat that opened up in the district that I lived in, and I learned about that, and I talked to my wife about it, and felt like that it was the right time and a good opportunity. And knowing that I may not win, I threw my hat in the ring and did it.
Has the experience been what you expected it to be?
No, not at all. I soon after being elected, the pandemic hit. Well, prior to that, our economy started to really change. BP leaving, Nordstrom's closing down. I mean, a number of things. Really, you could see the economy begin to shift, and then the pandemic hit. And so my first term was really sort of centered around our economy and COVID-19. And it was an incredible amount of work. It was very challenging in so many ways. And so, no, it was not what I expected it to be, but I felt like that it was a place that I was able to add a lot of value, and a place where more than anything, we needed people who could stay engaged and really listen to people regardless of what their perspectives were, and to be able to make really thoughtful, informed decisions in an environment that was just fraught with emotion and fear. And so I felt like my background and sort of the way that I conduct by myself added a lot of value to that time. Not jumping into the fire, but being able to stay calm, stay focused, make choices that I felt like ultimately saved lives and helped our city, but also to continue to listen to folks as scared and as mad as they were.
Howdy, Spirit of Alaska here with my good friend, Polaris the Eagle. Whenever I tell people from the lower 48 that I'm the Spirit of Alaska, they get all sorts of ideas of what that means, mostly based on what they think Alaskans are. You know what they imagine, someone big on grit, but low on brains. I agree, Polaris, it's downright aggravating. You know what's more aggravating? When someone from our fair land proves them right. The solution is to recommend the East Anchorage Book Club podcast to them. A wide berth of ideas and stories from those that are trying to shape Alaska, and it keeps you and them informed. Then you need no never mind what those in the lower 48 think.
I want you to talk about your worst experience. Like, what's been, I imagine that you have had some difficult days.
Sure. Yeah, for me, the work that I do, the nonprofit that I run, we spend a lot of time creating spaces for people to respectfully disagree and to have hard conversations about things that are very important. And so I am very comfortable in an environment where people are angry or people are fearful or there's a lot of emotion involved. And so sitting in assembly meetings with a lot of angry, frustrated, scared people was not challenging for me in general. But what was challenging is doing that day after day after day. And when you really are committed to looking at people and listening to people and trying to understand where they're coming from in a very real way, it absolutely exhausts you after a while. And the personal attacks become hurtful. At some point you can allow them to bounce off. But once you start to get torn down, they really begin to hurt. And especially when they're not only about you, but about your family or your friends or the city you live in or the things that you value. So that's the hardest part for me it was so intense at times that it really wore me down. And then the attacks became really personal and hurtful. And it made me question at times whether this was the right role for me. But I would go home and I would hug my kids and I would get a good night's sleep and I would get up in the morning and I'd feel better and I'd go back at it. And I think that that's the thing that I'm most proud of, really, is that I stayed engaged and I showed up and continued to listen and continued to try to make good decisions.
And has your family always been supportive, or have they ever thought maybe this isn't good for you, Dad? No, they've always been so supportive. I as I said, I've worked in the nonprofit world. I've worked in social service and drug and alcohol addiction and homelessness and lots of sort of community-based programs working with really tough issues and those kinds of things. And so they're used to me being involved in challenging things. So they've always been really so supportive, and that's how I'm able to do it, because I'm able to go home and have a really supportive family and folks that love me and will listen to my challenges in my day. My family's great, and my parents are here as well, and so they've been a huge part of my support system. I want to talk about your family. I will say that I assumed that you were Latino because of the last name.
Yeah.
But actually, I learned that Perez-Verdia is your wife's last name. You took your wife's last name.
That's right.
What was behind that decision?
Well, so just to clarify, so my background is I'm part European and part Native American, so that's my sort of heritage. And my wife is from Mexico City. She's Mexican. And when we got married, knowing that we were going to be living in the United States, and my last name is actually my adopted father's name, Holloway. It was Holloway. And so that's the name I grew up with, and that was my name. But when we got married and had kids, we really wanted our kids to have a direct connection to their Mexican heritage, and that was really important to us because we were living here. If we would have been living in Mexico, maybe we would have kept the Holloway name, right? So having them have that connection was very important to us. And simply for me, I didn't want to have a different last name. So I wanted to have the same last name as my wife and kids. So we did something creative, is we took Holloway, which was my original last name, and we made it all of our middle names. So my wife and 2 kids and my middle name, now Holloway. And Perez-Verdia, or Perez-Verdia, is our last name. And so, at the time, it didn't seem that big of a deal. But I will tell you that going to change my driver's license and my passport and my college transcripts, the amount of people that questioned, why would you do this? Or this is so strange, was shocking to me. And I think it's becoming more common now. But back in 2007, when we did this, lots of people were surprised.
And you're Native American. I know you grew up in Utqiaġvik, but are you Alaska Native?
No. So my biological father is Oglala Lakota from South Dakota. And but I grew up in Utqiaġvik. And so that was the culture that I grew up in, and my parents were both educators there, and so I had the wonderful experience of growing up in this very rich culture and eating muktuk and learning to speak Utqiaġvik a little bit, not fluently. And I still can consider that my home. I go back there very often and have friends there and love that community so much.
Do you have any relationship with the Dakota tribe?
No, I have a close relationship with a few cousins, but my biological father has passed away, and I don't have a strong relationship with that side of the family.
Did your parents, I guess your stepdad who adopted you and your mom, did they have any feelings about you taking Perez-Verdia?
It's funny because my dad, who that was his name, he didn't have very much concern about it. I think it was harder for my mom. I think because it felt like that was a part of the legacy of the work that she had been doing, but so I think it was hard at first, but they've all kind of adjusted to it now, and it's become kind of fun. I have a step brother, a half brother, and his last name is Johnson. So we have a very interesting family. My family, I have several adopted brothers and sisters. I have a half brother, and so we have a family that is mixed up. My adopted sister is African American. She's passed away though, and my brother, who's my half brother, he lives down in LA, and then I have several other sort of adopted siblings.
And did y'all all grow up in Utqiaġvik?
Yeah, we sure did.
Were you in a political family?
Well, my mother was Commissioner of Education for Alaska for a number of years, so she served under the Knowles administration and then partly under Murkowski. And so that was the time when there was a little bit of politics. And she was, the superintendent of the school district up there. My dad was the assistant superintendent. She was also the first president of Elmore College up in Barrow. And many of us still call it Barrow because we're still adjusting to Utqiaġvik. And but no, not really a political family at all. And I will say today, my father is a pretty strong Republican, and my mom is an independent. And so we have a family that is very for a sort of broad spectrum of political beliefs, and which is great because I find myself often. I define myself as somebody who is very in the middle. Politically, I find myself as somebody that socially probably leans a lot more left, but I feel very strongly about good economic policies and good financial policies and spending money in a very sort of practical way, and so I find myself as somebody who really tries to not fall to one side.
Does your Republican dad offer you advice, or does he?
Every day.
He does?
Every day.
I mean, do y'all have debates?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so wonderful about having a dad who's Republican, who I can come back to and talk about the issues, and I can hear his perspective on them, which is very similar to a lot of perspectives that I get at the assembly. People who come and testify, concerns about our border, concerns about our economy, concerns about lots of issues that I don't necessarily agree with him on, and but at least I get to hear his perspective, and I respect him so much that I know that he's coming from a good place, and that's really helped me to know that oftentimes when people come forward and they have a really strong opinion that's very different from mine, often underneath that is someone coming from a place of good, someone who really wants many of the same things that I want. They want safety, they want health, they want good education, they want good jobs, they want a lot of the same things that all of us want, but their idea of how to get there is very different. And so we often are battling over process or how we get to these things, as opposed to ultimately what we really want.
You work at, you're the director of the
President
and CEO of the Alaska Humanities Forum.
That's correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about that job. What is
the best job in the world?
Yeah, and for those who don't know, what is the Alaska Humanities Forum?
So the Alaska Humanities Forum is a nonprofit organization that's this year 50 years old. It is part of a network of humanities organizations across the country. So every state has a humanities council. We are the Alaska Council, so we get money from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And over the course of time, last 50 years, organizations like this, but particularly the one in Alaska, has really been about helping communities to talk about and work on the most important issues of our day. And so if you really sum it all up, the organization is about building strong, healthy, vibrant communities with communities, for communities. And the way that we do that is we create spaces, whether it's for youth, whether it's leadership programs, work with rural teachers, whether it's creating cohorts of very different people to spend 6 months wrestling through issues so that they not only learn more about themselves, but they learn more about others that are very different from them, and ultimately find creative solutions to many of the challenges that we face in our world. That kind of work is all about strengthening communities. And so the part of the belief is that at the heart of the challenges that we face, at the heart of these issues that you and I talk about all the time, economic challenges, social challenges, political challenges, environmental challenges, at the heart of those challenges are people, right? People are both the problem and the solution. And so by investing in people, investing in relationships, investing in building stronger connections, especially across difference, we really believe that we can build stronger communities and address these issues in a very real way. So it's not short-term work. We play the long game. We're about investing in communities so that they become stronger and healthier places. And so that's really what it's all about. And that shows up like youth programs, leadership programs, all kinds of programs. But we also are really about telling the story of Alaska, because we believe that through those stories, they can help us to learn. We can learn about our past and our present, and really learn about kind of where we're going. And so we do lots of magazines and films, and we create spaces for storytelling, whether it's oral storytelling or whether that's written or poetry or music. And so we invest in a lot of that work because we believe that those stories are so important. The Alaska story.
Taking it all back to the beginning.
Yeah.
You're on the facilitation group now for...
Yeah, so when John Weddleton was not reelected, they're only allowed to have 3 assembly members on that group. And so when he was not reelected, then I took his spot.
And who are the 3 now?
It would be Meg Zalatel and Felix Rivera and myself.
Okay. So Meg is still on it, even though she's also the director of ACEH.
Right, and so the determination is that she's actually coming there not as an assembly member, but as the director of the Alaskan Coalition to End Homelessness. And so, but she's still an assembly member. So legally, we need to make sure that we're not having more than 3.
Got it.
But she makes a conscious effort in those meetings to come as the director of that organization, and not as an assembly member. And she's been doing. I know that's a challenging thing to balance, and I understand that. Having, I worked for United Way while I was on the school board. And I literally had to walk into a meeting and say, in this meeting, I am coming in as the X for United Way, or I'm coming in as a school board member. So I understand that challenge. But I think she's doing a very good job of being very clear about when she is in one role and when she is in the other. And so in those meetings, she is solely there as the director of the coalition. And
who are the 3 members from the administration right now?
It's changed over time, I understand. I'm new. But right now it's Larry Baker and Alexis, who's the chief of staff, and then Joe Gerace, who is the director of the health department. So those are the 3 from the administration.
Last question that we ask all of our guests.
Yeah.
Can you recommend a book to our listeners?
Such a good question. So I would like to recommend 2. Well, first, the one book that I love and that I think is so important, and is really, if you read it, you get an understanding of the work that I do at the Alaska Humanities Forum. So it's a little bit of a plug, but it's Peter Block, and the book is called Community. And it's really about how communities can take control of their own communities, and how we can build strong, vibrant communities, and do it in a way that challenges a lot of the norms that we all grew up with about what is supposed to be or how things are supposed to be, and we can rethink those things in a really powerful way. So Community by Peter Block. And right now I'm reading a book called My Grandmother's Hands. I haven't finished it yet, but it's by Resmaa Menachem, and it's about It's about systemic racism, but it's looking at it through a trauma lens, and about how we carry on trauma from generation to generation, regardless whether you are white or black. Oftentimes, the atrocities and the awful things that we've seen throughout our history can be traced back to people experiencing trauma and then bringing that trauma forward. And it's a really powerful way to think about what's going on in our world, looking at violence, looking at oppression, looking at a lot of the sort of issues that we're trying to change.
It's called My Grandmother's Hands.
My Grandmother's Hands, yes, by Resmaa Menakem, and I would highly recommend it. It's really powerful. I haven't finished it yet, but it's pretty great.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely, this was a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope I was able to answer all your questions.
You did great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. And thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, rate, and review us. Next week, we have attorney Scott Kendall, who served as Chief of Staff to Governor Bill Walker and is now representing Alaska Redistricting Board members Nicole Borromeo and Melanie Banky in action against the Redistricting Board itself. Please tune in.